In this video, we're going to take a look at the levels adjustment layer. Now, there's a lot of things going on with the levels adjustment layer, and it's one of those adjustments that if you're a complete Photoshop neophyte, you might be a little intimidated by because it does have some histogrammatic information. So if histograms still intimidate you, be sure to check out the video specifically over histograms. Now, I'm going to go ahead and get one of these applied to this image. This image, by the way, is just the penguins image that is included with Windows 7. I almost said Photoshop 7, and that doesn't make any sense at all. So you can use any image that you like. You're not, of course, restricted to just using this one. I can't provide it to you anyway because it's not my picture. But let's go ahead and bring in a levels adjustment layer, which I did by going into my adjustments panel and clicking on its icon, which is in the top row, second one over. If you don't want to do that, you can just go down to the the adjustment layers menu down on your layers panel and click on levels, or you could even go to layer and jump down to new adjustment layer and choose levels from there. There's all kinds of ways to do this in Photoshop. So let's take a look at the properties. Now, the properties for this particular adjustment layer are pretty extensive because there are a lot of different ways that you can use this. So I'm going to keep things very simple at first, and I may end up having to kind of break the video up just to keep things nice and tiny and bite-sized. So first off, what are you looking at? You see this histogrammatic window here, which again is just like any histogram. It gives you a representation of each of the pixels of the image and where they sit along the tonal range. And in the end, that's what the levels adjustment layer is all about. It's all about adjusting your tonal range. So again, on the left, we have all of the dark pixels and how many pixels we have in that spectra, and then we have the lighter pixels on the right-hand side with the graph representing how many light pixels we have. Just by glancing at the histogram, because we see these elevated areas to the right-hand side, we know that the greater portion of our pixels in this picture are bright as opposed to dark. So this area with the histogram is considered our inputs. This allows us to adjust kind of the information that's going into the layer. We have three little sliders underneath the histogram. We have a black point, we have a white point, and we have our midtones. Now what this is going to do as we move these, let's just take a look. If I take the black point and I start to slide it up, the whole image gets darker. And that's because everything that is mapped, or everything that takes place in the histogram to the left of this pointer is going to be mapped to black. So you can think of this like your black cutoff point. So anything that goes beyond this little black slider will just go straight to black. That means as you start to drag this to the right, the whole image gets darker. Conversely, if we jump over to the white point and start to drag that to the left, everything beyond, everything to the right of that slider will now get mapped to white. So this allows us to lighten up the image overall. So you might find yourself just wanting to kind of tweak this down just a little bit to get things a little brighter, and maybe crush this in a little to get things a little darker. And by pushing in both ends of the spectrum, you're really, in the end, you're raising the contrast, as you can see represented in the image itself. So we'll push those out. And we also have a gray pointer in between, and that's going to be your midtones. And what this allows you to do is make a gamma adjustment. So you're just taking your midtones, and as you slide them to the right, you're pushing them darker, and as you slide them to the left, you're pushing them lighter. If you're completely new, that might throw you off just a little bit because hopefully you've already kind of hardwired into your head that the left of the spectrogram is the darker colors and the right of the spectrogram is the lighter colors. So if off the top of your head you're like, wait a minute, why is it when I push the slider to the right everything gets darker? You got to remember what you're saying. Everything beyond, down toward the darker end of the spectrum, everything that goes beyond this gray pointer is going to be mapped into the darker range at this point. So as you start sliding this point to the right, a larger percentage of the histogram is going to start getting mapped toward the darker end of things. So that's kind of the way you have to look at it. Now you can give these guys values numerically if you don't want to punch these in by yourself. So of course you see the entries down here. We could set this maybe to 10 like so and just kind of bump that in as you see there. You also see there's a button here to calculate your more accurate histogram, just like on the histogram panel, so you can click on this and things will become a bit more accurate, though admittedly, at least in my experience, the approximated histogram is going to be just fine. So that's the input area. Again, it's just a way for you to control the pixels that are sort of going into this filter. You can also control the pixels going out of the filter with the output levels, and this is represented by this little gradient bar. This allows you to control what colors are going to be considered black and which ones are going to be white. It's very, very simple. As I start to drag this up, take a look what's happening in the image. I'm losing my blacks. What you're doing is you're cutting off any data that falls outside this range. So the problem with doing this, well, it's not a problem, just something to be aware of. I don't want to say bad things like, the word problem. But as soon as you start to pull this off of the left-hand side, your little black flag here, you no longer have any true blacks in your image. Same thing with the other end. If we start to pull this away from white, we no longer have any true whites. So if you just find yourself needing to lighten or darken the image en masse without having to worry about what's going on a pixel by pixel basis, this is your place to do that. I'll be the first to confess, though, most of the time I do not find myself needing to adjust the output levels too terribly much. The slightest of adjustments is generally pretty good, because at some level you're still going to want to have some blacks and some whites. To me, the best images still have full black and full white somewhere in the picture, so you're not going to want to mess with that too terribly much. Now, that is one way, everything I've covered so far is one way to go about using the levels adjustment layer. You go in and you say, all right, well, let's go ahead and take the blacks and bring them up very, very slightly. So now I've done a little bit of slight darkening there. We can make the whites a little more brilliant just by bringing that in just a tad. And then we can adjust our midtones to compensate. And it's just finding that happy medium where you're happy with what's going on in the picture. Now, I've made this picture very, very bright now. It's almost like some sort of nuclear weapon has just started to go off. But that's okay. Now, of course, you also have your output levels as well, but the idea is you could go in here, tweak these flags out, and come up with the result that you like. That is one way to go about using this adjustment layer. But it's not the only way. There are a couple more. Another one is you see these three eyedroppers here on the left-hand side. We have a black point, we have a midpoint, and we have a white point. So black, gray, and white. And if you look really closely, the eyedroppers themselves are color-coded to correspond with that. This is the other way to use this adjustment layer. It's pretty handy if you can look at the image and see precise areas that you know need to be black and gray and white. So I can click on our first one, which is to specify a black point, and then pick a spot on the image that I know really ought to be black. So we have like this little spot up here on the penguin's face. So we know that should be black. And that just made a quick adjustment to the overall image. If you looked really closely, and I don't know how well it showed up on the video, the image got just barely perceptibly brighter because of that. Then I can switch over to my midtones and pick something that I think should be somewhere around a perfect neutral gray. So how about this spot right here on our penguin's belly? So I can click on that, and that sort of adjusted everything as well. And then finally, I can click on the white one and pick a white point. So maybe this white spot back here in the background. And there we go. So now I've used this method to say, all right, this should be black, this should be gray, this should be white, and I've used that as a quick way to adjust the overall tonal range of my image. It's a very handy way to work. That's your second way to use the levels adjustment layer. I guess technically, that could be the third, if you want to consider the drop downs for your presets to be like the first way. Maybe you just drop the thing and say, hey, I want my image to be darker, so I drop on a darker preset, or I want it to be lighter. We could call that the first way. We could call playing with the sliders the second way, and then we could call playing with your eyedroppers for the dark point, the midpoint, and the white point to be your third way. There's even another way, however, and it's a little bit secretive. It's not the most obvious thing in the world, but you have this automatic button. And if you click this, Photoshop will automatically make some adjustments, and it gives you some handy tooltip action if you hold your mouse over it. It says, automatically correct for color, contrast, or levels. Use Alt for options, unless you're on a Mac, and then I believe it's use Command or Option. I think it's the Option key. I'm not a big Mac person, so please don't throw rocks at me or anything. If you hold down the Alt key and click on the Auto button, you get the Auto Color Correction options. Conversely, if you don't have, maybe you're holding your coffee with one hand and you can't hit the Alt key without spilling everywhere, you can go to the little adjustment panel menu and you'll see the Auto Options menu option. You can bring it up that way. Now, this has several different settings in here. These aren't too terribly difficult, and just remember, if you get confused and you don't have this video to refer back to, make use of the tooltips because they're going to help. So, enhance monochromatic contrast. That is going to update all of the color channels of the image simultaneously in exactly the same way to boost your overall sense of contrast. Now, just as a quick tip, if we mouse over, this does the same thing as auto contrast. And if you find yourself going, what is this auto contrast you speak of? If we go over to under image, you'll see there's auto tone, auto contrast, and auto color. These are destructive, meaning they actually change your image, destructive commands that will automatically make adjustments to the tonal contrast or color range of your image. And these options here within this window allow you access to the algorithms that drive those commands. So if you set this to enhance monochromatic contrast, it's the exact same thing as using the auto contrast command, just FYI. Next you have enhance per channel contrast. This kind of does the same thing, but it does it on a channel by channel basis. The catch to that is because each channel is being handled individually, and the range between the lightest and most intense color variations is handled per channel. You may end up seeing a color cast. So if there was a really broad spectrum of changes, say in the red channel but not in the blue channel, once that all kind of gets evened out, you may see the blues suddenly get kicked up a little higher than they were originally. So don't be too shocked if you use this algorithm and find your colors changing slightly with like maybe a color cast over the entire thing. Next, we have find dark and light colors. This is going to boost the overall color contrast. And it tells you there, right there, what it does. Analyze the image to find the dark and light tones, and then it'll use those for your shadows and highlights. Now, if you combine that with snap neutral midtones, you're going to get the same thing as the auto color command. And what snap neutral midtones is going to do is it's going to find the closest thing it can find to a neutral color in your image, and it will snap that. So it's kind of like taking that midtone slider, and it'll snap that to a true neutral. So if you don't really have a neutral color, it will make it neutral, which will in fact adjust your entire tonal range. Underneath that, we can adjust some color clipping. So our shadows are currently set to black. If we start to adjust these, you can see, of course, it's just taking the darker areas of our image and making them whatever color we choose. So if we push those out toward white, of course we blow the image out. If your shadows for some reason are a little too dark, you can start bringing those up a little bit. Now you also have a clipping value. What this does is it controls a percentage away from the whatever color you specify that is going to get clipped to that color. So right now this is set to 0.1%, which is probably going to be okay, but it might end up being a little bit high. You may find yourself wanting to set it to 0, and then that way only the darkest colors will be mapped to your darkest color specified here. As you start to increase this, say to 0.5, then a broader range of colors that get close to that will be set straight out to black. But I'll go ahead and leave it at 0.1 for now. Now I'm going to skip down to highlights because it's kind of the same thing in reverse. The brightest areas are mapped to this color. So as we start doing outlandish things, you can see the result. But as you start to just play with the left-hand side of your color picker, bringing this down toward black just darkens the overall image. I don't think you'll often find yourself wanting to reach for an actual color, but in the Terminator hunting down some penguins, if that's the look you're going for, you now know how to do it. So we'll go ahead and click OK there, and of course you can clip anything within a certain percentage of that color all the way out toward white. Then you have midtones, and this allows you to adjust your overall gamma. This is great for adding a color cast to your image. So if you're looking at your picture and you think, it's just not cold enough, so maybe I need to add just a little bit of blue, then I can take my midtones and I can add a little bit of a color cast to those in this way. So that's a quick rundown of the auto color correction options. They're extremely useful when you need them. I don't often find myself reaching in here for any of the auto correction options. Usually when I grab a levels adjustment layers, because I know that I need to kind of bring my darks up just a little bit or tweak my midtones just a little bit. But again, if you need them, they're there to play with. So that's your final way to use the levels adjustment layer, is by using those automatic settings. Now, one thing we didn't cover is we have a drop down here. We were playing with RGB, but we can handle our channels independently. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this, but if I switch this over to red and start to bring this up, I am clipping off all of the intense red, so my image starts to go toward blue. Conversely, if I take my white point, again, because I'm in the red channel, and start to bring that down, I'm clipping off those brighter areas, and now I'm getting much more intense reds across my image. So If you're seeing problematic color casts, like there's too much red, too much blue, too much green across your image, you can use a levels adjustment layer and go straight to that problematic channel and start to adjust its spectrum to either bring up some greens or blues or reds or bring them down, however you see fit. So that is a rundown of the levels adjustment layer. Again, there is a lot going on with this adjustment layer. You can use it very simply, or you can really invest a lot of time and do some pretty wicked things with it. However, that will wrap up this video. Thanks a lot for watching.